November 16, 1957. A small hardware store in Plainfield, Wisconsin. A woman disappears. What police discovered next would become one of the most horrifying crime scenes in American history and inspire three of cinema's most iconic killers: Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill. This is the true story of Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. From birth, Ed had a droopy left eyelid, a condition called ptosis, giving him an unusual, unsettling appearance that would follow him throughout his life. His father, George Philip Gein, was a violent alcoholic who could never hold down a job. He worked as a carpenter, an insurance salesman, a tanner, even at a power plant, and for a railroad company, but always ended up fired because of his drinking. He beat his sons regularly and drank away what little money the family had. But it was Ed's mother, Augusta Wilhelmina Gein, who would shape him into a monster. Augusta was raised in an extremely strict Lutheran household where physical punishment was routine. She was fanatically religious and had a pathological hatred of sexuality. She saw it as evil, as the weakness of men, as sin incarnate. When Ed was 7 years old, he secretly watched his parents slaughter a pig on their farm. According to later psychiatric reports, this deeply aroused and fascinated him, a disturbing early sign of what was to come. In 1914, when Ed was 8, Augusta decided the city was corrupting her sons. She moved the family to a 155-acre isolated farm near Plainfield. The two-story farmhouse had no electricity, no running water. It was perfect for Augusta's plan: total isolation from the sinful world. Augusta preached to her sons daily from the Bible, particularly the story of Noah and the flood. She told them that God would send another flood to punish humanity for its immorality, especially the immorality of women. She taught them that nearly all women were prostitutes and agents of the devil. The only exception? Augusta herself. The boys were forbidden from making friends. They could only leave the property to attend school. At school, Ed became a victim of relentless bullying due to his shy demeanor and his mother's strange influence. Teachers described him as polite but emotionally stunted. Augusta never taught her sons about sex. She simply forbade it, creating a toxic mix of fear, confusion, and obsession that would poison Ed's mind for the rest of his life. Ed adored his mother unconditionally. His older brother, Henry, not so much. George Gein died in 1940 of heart failure, likely accelerated by decades of alcoholism. Augusta reportedly said his death was caused by his weakness and that he was going to hell. Ed was 34 years old. Then came May 16, 1944. Ed and Henry were burning brush to clear vegetation near the farm when the fire raged out of control. The brothers became separated in the chaos. When firefighters arrived, Ed reported his brother missing, but here's what made investigators suspicious. Ed led them directly to Henry's body, despite claiming he didn't know where his brother was. Henry was found dead in an area untouched by the fire. The official cause of death was listed as asphyxiation from smoke inhalation. But there was one major problem. Henry had bruises on his head consistent with blunt force trauma. Someone had struck him. No autopsy was ever performed. The death was ruled an accident. But investigators later discovered something crucial. Henry had been increasingly critical of their mother. He tried to break free from Augusta's psychological grip and confronted her multiple times in front of Ed. For someone who worshipped his mother as God, these confrontations were unforgivable. Did Ed kill his own brother to protect Augusta? We'll never know for certain, but the evidence strongly suggests he did. After Henry's death, Ed had his mother all to himself. Augusta suffered a stroke shortly after and became partially paralyzed. Ed became her caretaker, reading the Bible to her daily, binding himself even more tightly to her. December 29, 1945, the day Ed Gein's world ended. Augusta witnessed a neighbor beating his dog. When a woman from another house yelled at the man to stop, Augusta flew into a rage. Not about the dog, but about the woman. She called her a prostitute and became so agitated that she suffered a massive stroke. She died soon after. Ed was 39 years old. Ed's reaction was extreme. He wept through the entire funeral. Then he did something that revealed the depth of his obsession. He sealed off every room his mother had used, her bedroom, her sitting room, preserving them exactly as they were, like a museum, a shrine. He moved into the kitchen and one small room, living surrounded by the ghost of Augusta. The rest of the house began to deteriorate as Ed stopped cleaning, stopped maintaining his hygiene, stopped caring about anything except his mother's memory. He took odd jobs as a handyman around Plainfield. Locals considered him harmless, shy, reliable, good with kids. He was even trusted as a babysitter. But in private, Ed's mind was unraveling. He became obsessed with anatomy textbooks, pulp horror magazines, and crime reports about murder, cannibalism, grave robbing, and shrunken heads. At the local ice cream shop, people noticed he constantly read about criminal cases and stayed informed about every gruesome crime in the news. And then Ed started going to the cemetery at night. Between 1947 and 1952, Ed Gein made at least 40 nocturnal visits to 3 local cemeteries. He studied the obituaries obsessively, particularly looking for women who had recently died, middle-aged women who reminded him of his mother. Then he would dig them up. Gein later told psychiatrists he would visit the graves in a daze-like state, claiming he didn't always remember the details. Sometimes he would open a grave, look at the body, and rebury it. Other times he took souvenirs. And sometimes he took much, much more. Gein exhumed at least 9 complete bodies. He brought them home to his farm, where he carefully skinned them and preserved their remains using salt and other methods he'd learned from taxidermy and his mother's butchering techniques. What did he do with these body parts? He created what psychiatrists would later describe as the most disturbing collection ever discovered in American criminal history. Skulls became bowls, human skin became lampshades and chair upholstery. Female faces were carefully peeled from skulls and crafted into masks that he would wear in the moonlight, dancing around his property. But Gein's most shocking creation was what investigators called a woman's suit, a complete vest crafted from female torsos, breasts, and genitalia sewn together. He would wear this suit at night, believing he could somehow become his mother or become a woman like her. Gein denied necrophilia, insisting they smelled too bad. But he admitted he found the grave robbing sexually gratifying in other ways. For years, he lived this horrifying double life: reliable handyman by day, grave-robbing madman by night. But eventually, stealing from the dead wasn't enough. December 8, 1954, Pine Grove, Wisconsin. Mary Hogan, a 51-year-old tavern owner, was working alone when Ed Gein walked in. He had visited her tavern several times before, always watching her. Mary looked strikingly similar to Augusta Gein. Gein shot her in the head, dragged her body to a sled, and pulled it through the snow to his truck. Mary Hogan simply vanished. The investigation went nowhere. No one suspected the quiet handyman from Plainfield. 3 years later, Gein struck again. November 16, 1957, Worden's hardware store in Plainfield. Bernice Worden, a 58-year-old hardware store owner, was preparing to close for the day. Her son, Frank Worden, was the local deputy sheriff and had mentioned to Gein that he'd be out of town hunting that weekend. Gein knew Bernice would be alone. That morning, Gein purchased a gallon of antifreeze from the store. When he returned later, he locked the front door behind him. He went straight to the back, grabbed a .22 caliber rifle from the wall, loaded a bullet he'd brought with him, and shot Bernice in the head. He dragged her body to the back, loaded it into her own pickup truck, took $41 from the cash register, and drove to his farm. When Frank Worden returned from his hunting trip and found the store locked with blood on the floor, he immediately suspected Ed Gein. The antifreeze receipt, the last one his mother had written, had Ed's name on it. Police raced to Gein's farm. November 17, 1957, What police found at Ed Gein's farm would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Sheriff Arthur Schley entered the shed outside the house and felt something brush against his jacket. He shined his flashlight up and saw what he initially thought was a deer carcass hanging from the rafters. It wasn't a deer. It was Bernice Worden, decapitated, gutted, and hanging upside down by her ankles with a crossbar through them, dressed out like a hunted animal. Inside the house, the horror multiplied. The stench of decomposition was overwhelming. Garbage and junk covered every surface, and scattered throughout were human remains. Bernice Worden's head in a burlap sack. Mary Hogan's face preserved as a mask. 4 noses in a cup. Whole human bones and fragments. A heart in a saucepan on the stove. Skulls used as bowls. Chairs in a wastebasket upholstered with human skin. Lampshades made from facial skin. A shoebox full of female genitalia. Leggings made from human leg skin. A belt made entirely of human nipples. 9 vulvas in a shoebox. Skulls mounted on bedposts. And the woman's suit, a complete vest with breasts and female organs attached. Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory cataloged remains from at least 15 different women. Ed Gein was arrested at a grocery store in a neighboring town. When confronted, his first words were, "Somebody framed me." But under interrogation, he confessed to everything. Ed Gein's case became a sensation. Media from around the world descended on tiny Plainfield, Wisconsin. The public was simultaneously horrified and fascinated. On January 6, 1958, Gein was committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane after being deemed unfit to stand trial. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with schizophrenia of the chronic undifferentiated type. For a decade, doctors observed him. They noted he was cooperative, polite, even helpful with maintenance tasks. He showed no violent tendencies in the hospital. Staff described him as socially childlike, preferring routine and solitude. In 1968, after 10 years of treatment, Gein was declared competent to stand trial. Due to his mental health history, he was tried before a judge rather than a jury. Psychiatric experts testified that Gein believed he was ordained by God to kill, that he robbed graves to substitute human parts for the companionship of human beings, and that he suffered from severe delusions involving his mother. Gein was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Bernice Worden, but in the penalty phase, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was sent back to Central State Hospital, then later transferred to Mendota Mental Health Institute in Madison, a minimum security psychiatric facility. Ed Gein died there on July 26, 1984, of respiratory failure caused by lung cancer. He was 77 years old. He's buried next to his mother in Plainfield Cemetery. His grave marker has been repeatedly vandalized and even stolen. It's now in a museum. Ed Gein only confessed to 2 murders. By legal definition, he wasn't even a serial killer. But his impact on American culture and criminal psychology is immeasurable. In 1959, author Robert Bloch, who lived just 35 miles from Plainfield, published a novel called Psycho, creating Norman Bates, a man obsessed with his dead mother who preserves her corpse and assumes her identity. In 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre introduced Leatherface, a killer who wears masks made of human skin. In 1988, Thomas Harris published The Silence of the Lambs, featuring Buffalo Bill, a killer creating a woman suit from his victim's skin. All 3 were inspired by Ed Gein. His case became a cornerstone in the development of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, helping agents understand ritualistic and compulsive offenders. Future serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Kemper would employ similar methods: trophy taking, body preservation, and post-mortem mutilation. The case also revolutionized the legal understanding of the insanity defense, establishing precedents still referenced today. Ed Gein lived most of his life in isolation, controlled by a deeply disturbed mother, never forming normal relationships, never understanding sexuality, never receiving the mental health treatment that might have prevented his descent into madness. He died a quiet death in a psychiatric ward, just an old man with cancer. But his crimes changed America forever. Sometimes the real monsters aren't supernatural, they're human. And sometimes reality is far more terrifying than any horror movie could ever be.